Welcome to the Storytime channel. Hope you're all doing well. My name is Steven, and first things first, I do a giveaway every single week, so if you're interested in entering and don't know how to, I'll tell you exactly how later on in the video. But today we have some malicious compliance stories, and our first story of the day is by georgilm. Teacher won't let me into the classroom? I was in my last year of high school, year 12 in Australia, and back when I was doing school, it was very important that you physically attend class. Back then, I also happened to have severe major depression and a sister who was not good at getting organized and ready to leave on time. We had a teacher at my school who I'd always despised. He didn't encourage independent thought and spent our 70-minute periods writing on the board for us to copy down, just cycling back and erasing and writing continuously, no questions allowed until the last 10 minutes. He was also notorious for not listening to students and had an unspoken rule that he would lock students out of the class for 5 to 10 minutes further when they were late. Let's call him Mr. Richard for obvious reasons. Well, one morning I was 5 minutes late to his class, first period 8:45 a.m., due to my sister throwing a tantrum. I knocked on the door and Mr. Richard says, "Was the bus late?" Apparently his only valid excuse for running late to class. I say no, but "You can't come in," shuts door in my face. Well, after bursting into tears, I decided that his unspoken rule of being left outside the classroom for 5 minutes when one attended late never actually stated one was required to wait outside the door to enter the room when he deigned to let the student in. So I wandered off to the library to find something interesting to read. Apparently, after he opened the door and found me missing, the school had to call my parents and explain they'd misplaced me and why. I was eventually found, and Mr. Richard had the nerve to ask, in front of my parents and the principal, why I, A, hadn't told him the reason I was late, because he didn't let me say so, and B, didn't wait outside the door, because you didn't say so, and I wasn't going to waste valuable learning time that my parents pay for standing and staring at a door. My parents ripped them a new one, and Mr. Richard didn't lock anyone out of his classroom for at least the next 7 years. So my younger brother tells me. It gave me great pleasure to get one up on such a hard-headed, infuriating teacher. Let me ask you guys, do you think waiting outside the classroom for 5 minutes when you're late is a valid disciplinary action of sorts? Or do you think that the teacher should just deal with it if they're late, bring them into the classroom, and maybe figure out some other kind of disciplinary action that doesn't leave them literally outside of the classroom? Let me know in the comments down below. Our next story is by oscarmendonca. Planning permission, you say? Behind my house, there's an area reserved for garages. Plans were drawn in 1968, and only 3 of the 18 allocated plots have a garage built. The remaining have a cement base, and we park there. As spaces are narrow, 2.4 meters wall to wall, and brick garages are expensive, I thought of having a pre-built one installed for a quarter of the cost. Someone on the same street saw me take measures and asked me if I was putting a garage up. Said yes, to which they replied if I had gotten planning permission. Confused, I said no, don't think I need. It turns out I do. To which he replied that he would then call them after I have the garage installed. After looking into it and confirming I do need to apply for planning permission at an extra cost, I was a bit annoyed. All I wanted was a place to use as storage, and here's this guy being kind of passive-aggressive with his comments. The reason is actually he wants to buy some of the plots near mine, but no one wants to sell them to him. I can be very petty, so I bought a rundown Luton van and had it parked there, sorn and using as storage. No planning permission required. Attached to this post is a picture of his beautiful Luton van used as storage that they don't have to get a garage constructed for. If people are gonna be petty, sometimes you gotta get creative with your solutions, and this one is. Our next story is by foonsirhc. You need to call me whenever you finish these. I do contract database work for a handful of companies. Nobody pays me to be on call, so the general rule of thumb is if you need something done, give me a few days heads up. Unless someone specifies that something is time sensitive and calls me to ask if I can bump it up, I tackle things in the order they were received. I've been somewhat overwhelmed with the volume of silly little tasks being thrown my way the past few weeks, but I get by on little sleep in the first place, so it's not unusual for me to be cranking out spreadsheets well after 10 p.m. For the most part, everyone is understanding and cooperative, but there's this one person, we'll call her Lucy, who is simply not okay with me not responding to and taking care of her requests immediately. She'll send an email, a text after 5 minutes, and then call on repeat until I pick up if there's anything she'd like me to do. I started off with the impression that this was simply someone who's been ignored in the workplace before, and I didn't want to be the person who confirms who concerns. So I spent some time kind of bending over backwards with whatever nonsense Lucy throws my way. About a week ago, Lucy sent me a massive list of unrelated tasks she'd like me to do. This has been her move lately as she tries to cut in line. Come up with anything she might want done and throw it out there at the beginning of the week. I gave Lucy a call to ask about prioritization as she makes everything out to be urgent. For context, anything being urgent means Lucy isn't doing her job correctly. When I asked what she'd like me to prioritize, Lucy laughed and said, "My email." I explained that I was already neck deep for the next few days and anything that isn't time sensitive will be taken care of in the order it was received. Lucy didn't like this. She started asking me if I would do it if XYZ coworker had been the one who asked. I told her no, that really has nothing to do with this, and that the reason I'm calling is to make sure anything she actually needs done in a timely manner will get done. She became indignant and threatened to tell the chairman of the organization about how I was ignoring her. Kind of funny because that's who I was sitting with at the time. Needless to say, I wasn't too concerned about her threat, but this is when I realized her "nobody listens to me" shtick is just a manipulation tactic. Anywho, Lucy explains how little she cares, very little, and that if I can't be bothered to help her now, she wants me to call her whenever I get to each task from her list. I thought she was joking, kind of chuckled and asked if she really wants phone calls after 10 p.m. She must have thought I was exaggerating or trying to claim I'm an incredible worker because she responded with, "If you think you work harder than me, you're mistaken." Again, chuckled a bit and explained that I'm not necessarily busting my butt in the middle of the night, that just happens to when some things get done. Went back and forth a bit, but she held her ground on demanding a phone call when I get to each task. Welp, last night around 1 a.m. I got to one of her requests. Lucy wanted me to add someone's middle name to the email platform they use. This couldn't possibly be less trivial. Certainly didn't have any follow-up questions about the task. I went back and forth about calling her, but I couldn't stop thinking about her attitude, belittling me, and most importantly, insisting she get a darn phone call no matter what time or how stupid. She answered the phone and said, "Never call me at this time again," and hung up. Deal. Lucy to me screams entitled. Something about the way she's acting makes me believe that everything was just kind of handed to her on a silver platter, and they've never really had to deal with people turning them down for whatever reason. So OP calling them at a weird hour and probably waking them up doesn't bother me too badly at all. Our next story is by Mrssaltyspanker. You are fine, go back to class. I was 14, maybe 2 months into high school and in gym class. Teacher has us doing suicides. Run forward to a point, run backwards to the line, run forward to the next point, backwards to the line. When I tripped running backwards and threw my hands back to catch myself. Since we were doing suicides on the rubber cement track, I feel instant pain and let out a cry. Teacher, without looking, says go to the nurse while I sobbed in pain. I walk by myself up to the school doors and try to open the door, and I can't move my fingers. Since I was sent back by myself, I sit on the ground and sob some more. A FedEx driver pulled up, sees me, asks what's wrong, and instantly went into a panic. He opened every door from the front door to the nurse. He explains how he found me and she asks what happened. After explaining, she briefly looks at me and says, "The bell is about to ring, you are fine, go back to class." When I asked her to just call my mom, she said no. She opens the door after me faking about not being able to move my fingers, and I make my way back to the gym. I decided, even though I had a phone and could have asked someone to call my mom, that if I was fine, I would go back to class. I managed to convince a friend of my cousin's to take my binder and books to my next class, where I couldn't take notes or participate because I was getting dizzy from pain and wanted to puke. Had one of my friends take my books from that class to the next one, my second to last class of the day, and my cousin is in there. She sees me silently sobbing, trying to pay attention, and asks what happened, and once I explain, she called my mom in the middle of class. Not even 15 minutes later, my name is called from the speaker to go to the nurse. My cousin takes my stuff and puts it in my locker. Once I get to my mom, she explodes when she sees my wrists. Yes, you read that right. Wrists are twice the size and purple. She is screaming, asking why she wasn't called and why I went back to class. I turned to the nurse and said, "She told me there was nothing wrong and that she wouldn't call you and to go back to class." My mom lost it. She screamed at the nurse, who only said, "I don't have X-ray vision, how would I have known?" Screamed at the principal and took me to an emergency doctor appointment. Family doctor did X-rays and said I would have to go to the specialist in the morning because it was so swollen it looked like multiple fractures in both wrists, so he could not cast them. I had to endure another ride home and all night with Tylenol as my only pain meds and bags of veggies on my wrists throughout the night. Go to the specialist who looked at both wrists, took more X-rays, and came in asking what color I wanted my casts, since both wrists were broken and along the growth plate, so maybe permanent weakness and or pain for the rest of my life. Mother raised heck sued the school. They refused to pay any expenses and said to sue them. Demanded the nurse be fired. She was, and when the school was going to make me retake gym the next year and fail this year, she said no way was I being punished for their ineptitude. So that's the story of how I made my school my witch because of a stupid nurse and the refusal to call my mother. I know it's probably a common enough occurrence for kids to fake injuries or fake sickness, but if you're a nurse for a school, you really have to take that stuff seriously. You can't just be like, "Well, the bell's coming up, I know you're faking it, so just run off." It sounds like they didn't even check. If you as much as just touched the kid's wrist, you probably would have realized something's very wrong here. Either that or they're an A-class actor. What a terrible nurse. I hope they never got a job again like that. This next story is by Draconian1429. My Grandad is a Legend. Just a short one. My granddad spent close to 60 years in the building trade, starting when he was 16. This is a story he told me today of when he first started at 16. So my granddad starts working at this job site back in the 1960s. Never done any building work before, so they put him with a very experienced worker who was the supervisor of this job, or foreman if we use trade language. The foreman was the sort of hardline supervisor nobody likes, but he gets the job done. One day he gets my granddad to mark bricks on a wall with a pencil measuring for one thing or another. Now, foreman insisted on using a white pencil so it stood out from the red bricks. Only it was winter and had recently snowed. So my granddad, happy as anything to get back at this hardline foreman, went and marked up everything on site that needed to be marked. Foreman comes back an hour later to check, can't see anything, and accuses my granddad of slacking. Granddad happily points to where he had marked the bricks and wipes away some of the recent snow to prove it. Then he hands in that day's paperwork, completed in white pencil, and wishes the foreman a good evening. As my granddad tells it, the guy got very red in the face and insisted from that moment forwards that standard gray pencils would be fine from that point on. Yeah, you definitely think that you would want to adapt considering the circumstances of the weather being a factor. Maybe something more like a yellow might be a little bit more proper. Something that probably just can't blend in almost anywhere. So quickly now, I want to explain just how to enter the giveaway. All you need to do is leave a comment on this video relevant to something you saw or heard or liked in any story in that video. That's it, you're entered. But it applies to every single video we upload this week. So to get the best odds at winning the $30 Amazon gift card giveaway, you'll want to leave a comment relating to any of those videos all week long. On Sunday, after the last video has gone out, I'll pick one comment at random and let you know on the following Monday who has won, and then it starts all over again. So make sure you leave a relevant comment on this video and additionally every video I upload this week for the absolute best chance to win. And while you're at it, why don't you go ahead and give the videos a like too, because it helps more than you could imagine. That said, our final story of the day is by Successful Medicine 9. Put the animal's health first? Okay. A few years ago, I worked at a big pet store, the one that people feel intelligent for shopping at. Part of my assigned duties were to come in every morning before opening and take care of the small animals. That meant feeding them, but also cleaning out their habitats on a weekly basis. The most difficult habitat to clean by far was the aviary. The store manager had regularly chided me and other employees for not having it done in time for opening. There was also a sick room for the retail animals that arrived or became sick and injured. Every closing manager was responsible for signing off on that room. Animal has water, animal has proper temperature variance and habitat, etc. And every morning manager was also responsible for this at the beginning of the day. On this particular day, I noticed a bird cage about 12 feet up on a shelf above the sink. I had seen finches in it the week before, but there were none I could see from the ground. There was no stool/step ladder, so I figured I'd get started on the aviary before I got chewed out again and ask my department manager about it later. 10 minutes pass and my department manager shows up in the aviary. I mentioned the empty bird cage to him, and he thought it was odd since he saw them the day before. Turns out, the finches died overnight because their water was not refilled by the closing team, and the closing manager signed off on it anyway. Later that morning, the store manager calls me and my manager into the office. She told me that I was irresponsible for not checking on the finches when I first went in there and that their death was partially on me. I told her that they were clearly dead before I got there this morning, and I checked in with my department manager 10 minutes after I noticed their empty cage. I also mentioned that the closing manager and another coworker signed the checklist as if they had taken proper care of the sick animals. To the store manager, it didn't matter. She would not let me leave her office without me signing a formal write-up. She said, "You need to put the animal's health first." This made my blood boil. Just the day before, she couldn't tell the difference between an anole and a chameleon, and Steve Irwin was my role model. Enter malicious compliance. For the health of the animals, I sought a group of people who are for their ethical treatment. I told them all about the conditions of the sick room, including the birds that had recently died. They actually organized a gathering to picket the store that very weekend. It just so happened that that weekend was also a huge sales event for the store. I overheard the managers on that Thursday talking about how they were anticipating $10,000 to $14,000 in profits that weekend, and it turns out that they only got close to $4,000 thanks to PETA. Better yet, there was never a checked box in the sick room that wasn't actually followed up on again. Not while I still worked there, anyway. Now this definitely pisses me off. It is absolutely on those closing people for not giving the birds water and not checking and signing off on it. It's not OP's fault that they didn't check the dead birds when they walked in the morning. So the fact that they're even trying to force a formal write-up on them for that is ridiculous. Just the negligence alone is enough to just totally upset you. I think OP did the absolute right thing in having that picket show up. But with that being said, that's all the time we have for today. So which of these stories was your favorite and why? Let me know in the comments down below. But besides that, if you enjoyed the video, please consider liking and subscribing and turn notifications on if you haven't so you'll never miss an upcoming video. Any little thing that you do helps the channel grow so much more. Whether it's commenting, subscribing, or just watching the video, thank you all so very much for supporting me right here on the Storytime channel. I hope you all have a wonderful day, and I'll see you all next time right here.